Are we on? Okay, these three philosophers of ancient Greece, now they weren't the first philosophers in history. I would love to teach you about the guys who came before them. It's a fascinating story, but that's not for high school. For high school, we're going to talk about the three big ones, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, Socrates didn't say one day, I'm going to be a philosopher. He just happened to be a thinker who believed in reasoning things through. He would sit and young people would come to him and he would ask them questions. They would ask him a question, he'd ask them several questions back. His questions would often lead them to their answer. He believed that you should seek virtue first. Virtue was the hallmark of his philosophy. So if you see here, you might want to highlight seek virtue in the hallmark of philosophy and the Socratic method. I think that on your test you may need to match these to their hallmark philosophy. Socrates, and I gave you an example of the Socratic method at the beginning of this class. You know A and B, and you can figure out C and asking questions. He is considered one of the founders of Western philosophy because he always sought truth, and Plato was one of his students. He never wrote anything, but Plato wrote about Socrates, and all the information we have came from other people who wrote about him. Notice that Socrates lived at the same time that Buddha was on his walkabout, finding enlightenment, and Confucius was teaching about family relationships, and the Hebrew priest Ezra was teaching. So there's where he was in the Bible. But, I mean, he wasn't in the Bible. That's what was happening, that's recorded biblically at that time. So he was a workman. He didn't just sit around and answer questions. He had a job. He was a stonemason. And the Stoics, who were leading the Athenians' limited democracy at that time, found that he was stirring up trouble. He was making the young people question the rules of Stoicism. And Stoicism has to do with doing your duty and honor and all this sort of thing. And they didn't want young people to think. They wanted them just to do their duty. There is a lot of Stoicism that was, when Rome became Christian, they combined many Stoic ideas. You can see it when you read Paul. All right, then the next philosopher was Plato. And Socrates took his life at age 70 when he was condemned to death. He drank hemlock instead of letting the Athenians execute him. He was surrounded by the people he cared about when he died. Plato died at age 80, and the story of his death is interesting. He was at a party, and I don't remember if it was a wedding or just a big get-together, but everybody, you know, he was part of the guests, and he sat down. He got tired. He sat down in apparently a little nook, and he was found there dead at the end of the party. He had a very peaceful death. He died among friends, unlike Socrates, who had to drink poison. And he was the originator of political philosophy. Now, I think his most popular book is probably The Republic. And The Republic talks about the qualifications for a leader in government. So if you have a leader in government, he talks about how old they have to be. He had a list of things they had to experience before they could be a leader. They had to be over 50, and they had to have experienced what every class of people does. There was quite a list of qualifications. And I've thought about this many times. What if someone said, I want to be a brain surgeon? And so they put up a sign that they were going to run for election as a brain surgeon. So all these people decide to be elected as a brain surgeon, and the one that wins says, I'm now a brain surgeon. Would you want to go to that guy to have surgery on your brain? No education, just he was chosen. He had the nicest smile or the best talk, and he was chosen as a brain surgeon. And yet, in government, we'll let practically anybody run for office, as is evidenced today. And they may not have political experience. They may not know about the history of world economics. They may not know anything about politics. But if they have a flashy smile and they say the right words, they can get elected. And Plato was against that. He had very strict qualifications for leaders, and he had a lot of things they had to do to be disinterested. And that means that they would rule without the possibility of having any advantage to themselves. For example, if I was the president and I owned tons of businesses, I would be biased towards not taxing businesses because I'm a business owner. He made sure that the person who was leading the country or the people could not have those kinds of biases. They didn't qualify if they had those kind of biases. So he really started a lot of thinking about political philosophy. He wrote other things as well, but that was what he's most noted for. He greatly influenced Christian thought because Augustine of Hippo, the famous Saint Augustine, who has greatly influenced Christianity today, was a reader and studier of Plato. So he left record of Socrates, as I said, and he founded a school called the Academy, where he could teach people oratory and different subjects, and of course it would be from his point of view. And that academy is one that the next philosopher attended, Aristotle. He attended the academy from a teenager to 30-some years of age, so he was a student a long time. There's a famous painting called The School of Athens, and I show it in my art class. I should have had it today to show you because it's a picture of or a conception of Plato and Aristotle and all the famous philosophers around them. But he had this academy, and he distrusted democracy a lot. He said democracy is basically, I don't have his exact quote, but I just read it last night. Or did I write it on this paper? I might have. No, I didn't. He said something to the effect that you don't want a democracy because in a democracy, the idiots can take control. The people that know nothing can take control. The people that have no idea who is a good leader can take control. How can they do it? They can vote. And so he was really against that, and he was very suspicious of democracy because they decided Socrates was no good and they put him to death, and he didn't like that. He was suspicious of them. But there have been a lot of people who have said quotes similar to that. I know Winston Churchill said the greatest argument against democracy is a 5-minute conversation with the average man. What does that mean? The greatest criticism of democracy. Do you know what that means, Ryan? What can you think that might mean? The greatest criticism of democracy is 5 minutes conversation with the average man.
Probably because he doesn't really know. He doesn't really know like the basics of even his own government.
Exactly. The common man, and that's one of the downfalls of having a democracy. The good thing is that the common man has a system of checks and balances, so he can't be abused as easily because he has a voice. The bad side is the common man often doesn't know what he's doing when he votes. And so he talked about that. Plato thought that was a big mistake. He didn't believe in democracy. He lived at the same time that Hippocrates lived in Greece, the famous physician, Demosthenes, and he lived at the same time as Alexander the Great, Plato did, but also Aristotle. And when we go next to Aristotle, we see that Aristotle's key philosophy, or the hallmark of his philosophy, is the golden mean. And my mother preached this to us all the time. The golden mean, the best choice lays in the middle. She always spoke against extremism on either side, and she always said, try to find the middle road. And she believed that most sincerely. If I'd get really gung-ho about something, even if it was a good thing, but if I got really fanatical about it, she was afraid that my fanaticism would cause me to forget the concerns of the person on the other extreme. And so she used to tell me, find the middle road, understand your opponent, know their needs, come up in your mind with the best compromise. And I was raised that way. Maybe that influences a lot who I am today, I don't know, but this was what she called the golden mean. But the golden mean he emphasized reason, and he also distrusted democracy because he said it could lead to mob rule. Because if you know what the IQ test is in our country, this is really frightening. The IQ test, which is only one test of intelligence, I don't want to say that if someone has a low IQ, they're utterly lost. You know, somebody can have a low IQ, but be an incredibly brilliant person kinesthetically. Maybe they can do things with their body that other people can't do. But in this normal IQ test that we use today, the mean where most of the people fall is around 100. The scary part of that is that half the population is below here. The other half, let's go up to say 110. Now the reasoning abilities of someone with 110 are okay. They're not powerhouses, but most of the population is here. That leaves, when you start getting to the range where people can really analyze facts and philosophy and politics, there's fewer. And this, I'm telling you, the idea of Aristotle, okay? This is just to represent what he says. He says it can lead to mob rule because it's a majority rule. And so you can have the people that aren't the best qualified. And of course that can't be 100% accurate, but that's what his view was. And he wrote volumes of books and notes and letters. Now the areas that he studied, I want you to look here because this is the last thing I want you to see. Look at what he studied, accomplishments under Aristotle. Are you with me in that section? Besides philosophy, physics, he made contributions in all these areas. He didn't just study them, he advanced these sciences. Physics, biology, zoology, metaphysics, logic, ethics, aesthetics, poetry, theater, music, rhetoric, linguistics, psychology, medicine, politics, and government. I guess he was sort of what we would call, before his time, a Renaissance man. Okay, make sure you check RenWeb for what you're responsible for tomorrow. Have a good day.